Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over the hunter matchup as a rogue, how to beat a hunter in a 1v1, whether it's world PvP or a duel. Now this is going to be the first video in a series of videos on dueling, and we're going to start with Hunter. Hunter is really difficult. It's definitely the hardest matchup that a rogue faces in a 1v1, but I'm going to be going over everything you can do to increase your chances of beating a hunter, whether it's specific items that you can use to try and counter, for example, their freezing trap, or particular things you can do to try and counter scatter shot. There's a lot of things you can do as a rogue to keep the hunter on their toes, make things difficult for them to try and give yourself the best chance to win. Next, I think it's important to go over the abilities a hunter has, how they're going to use them, and what you can do to counter those abilities. So up first, we have wing clip. It's going to slow you by 60%. You can evasion so that the wing clip has a reduced chance to hit you in the first place. And they can only try the ability once every 1.5 seconds. So if you are, have evasion up, it's probably not going to be worth their time to just sit there and wing clip you, or else you'll get a lot of damage in. So that's a good answer to wing clip, is evasion before you even get wing clipped. But even if they do hit you with the wing clip, it's not the end of the world, as crippling poison is a 70% slow and wing clip is only 60%. So the hunter should not be able to get away as long as you have crippling poison on them, even if they wing clip you. Now, while we're talking about wing clip, there is a talent called improved wing clip that has a 20% chance to immobilize the target. So this would be more of a reason why you want to evasion and not let a hunter just freely wing clip you, because there is a chance that you get immobilized if they do talent into this. Not everyone chooses to talent into this, so it's not always going to happen, but another thing to keep in mind. Another, talent that hunters have in the survival tree that can immobilize you is going to be counterattack. Now, this will snare you for 5 seconds, and you can't block, dodge, or parry it. So there's nothing you can really do to avoid this hitting you, and you can't use evasion to counter it. The only thing you can do to try and mitigate counterattack happening, because it's a 5-second cooldown, is to try and not get parried. So trying to keep the hunter stunned, because while they're stunned they can't parry, trying to attack from behind since you can't parry from behind, and also trying not to attack directly into Deterrence, which is a talent we're going to talk about in a minute, but basically increases parry chance. Now, you also have Concussive Shot. This is another thing hunters are going to use to create distance, and they can only use it at range, and when they do use it, they're usually going to be able to create a lot of distance. 4 seconds is a really long slow. This is something, a lot of cases, you're going to have to try and sprint or vanish to remove this effect, or else you're just not going to be able to catch up to the hunter. And once they have created distance and once they've concussive shot, you're already starting to get into trouble. But if you do get slowed for 50% for the full duration, it's going to be a problem. This is another reason why you might want to hold your sprint, if you have improved sprint, until after you get concussive shotted, so you can just sprint and take this away. However, a good hunter a lot of times won't concussive shot until after you've sprinted if you play daggers. So just keep that in mind. Also, improved concussive shot, it has a 20% chance to stun you if talented, and every hunter is going to take this if they're a PvP spec. And this is really obnoxious. If you get stunned by this, you're obviously going to be in a lot of trouble. Next, we've got Aspect of the Cheetah. Now, this presents an opportunity, but also a problem. So anytime the hunter gets away from you, they can Aspect of the Cheetah, and you're just not going to be able to catch them unless you use sprint or some cooldown to catch up. That's not great. So they can essentially kite you forever if they do have Aspect of the Cheetah up. So you do need to use cooldowns to catch up to a hunter once they've created distance. However, if you're able to do damage to the hunter in any way, they will be dazed. So a lot of hunters will cancel the aspect if they see you doing something, but if you're able to damage them, they could be in a lot of trouble. Lastly, we've got Scatter and Trap, which I guess I'll get more into what's called the Scatter Trap combo. A hunter is going to try and hit you with a Scatter Shot, which will disorient you. They're going to run up to you, they're going to feign death, and then they're going to place a freezing trap, and you're going to be frozen in place for 10 seconds. Now, it's important to note that Freezing Trap and Scatter Shot do share a diminishing return. So even though it says here 20 seconds for Freezing Trap, if they used a Scatter Shot on you, it's only going to last 10 seconds, the Freezing Trap. It also is important to note if a hunter in any situation decides to feign death and freeze and doesn't scatter, it's also a pretty good, it's unlikely they're going to Scatter Shot you within 15 seconds of the trap breaking, simply because a 2-second Scatter Shot's not going to be as effective. So that's another thing. If you just got frozen and they didn't use Scatter Shot, chances are they're not going to want to use it for another 15 seconds as well because of that shared diminishing return. Lastly, I want to mention grenades can really make your life rough too. Good hunters will throw a grenade before the Scatter Shot to try and play around any counter you might have, and I'll get into some counters for Scatter Shot soon here, and that'll make more sense. But yeah, if they do throw grenades, it's going to be trouble, and you're probably going to have to try and vanish it, or else once you get hit by the grenade, you're going to get trapped, and it's going to be a problem. Next, I want to go over the things that the hunter can do to prevent you from going in stealth. Obviously, they can flare you. Flare takes you out of stealth and prevents you from re-stealthing, but it also applies a debuff that stays with you even after you exit the flare for a few seconds. So just make sure if you're running outside of a flare that you wait for the debuff to go away before you vanish. So that can be an annoying thing as well. It also is deceivingly large. It is a larger hitbox than the visual effect. So if you camp out right on the edge of the flare, you'll get taken out of stealth. So just know you have to be a little further away, and it can be sometimes hard to tell how close you can get to the flare without getting de-stealthed. Next, we have Serpent Sting. Serpent Sting is generally only going to be used on you by the hunter if they have already trapped you and they're starting to kite you. And the purpose of Serpent Sting is a little bit of damage, but mainly so that you can't vanish without getting taken out of stealth by the Serpent Sting. Once you are under the effect of Serpent Sting, you can't get trapped though. If they do mess up and Serpent Sting you and then go for a trap or a scatter, the damage from Serpent Sting is actually going to break the trap or the Scatter Shot because they break on any damage taken. Lastly, I want to make sure you're aware that track hidden is a thing that all hunters, if they're expecting you, are going to be tracking, and they're going to be able to have increased stealth detection. This means they're going to be able to see you from a mile away, especially if you do not have Master of Deception, as generally Dagger Rogues don't have Master of Deception. So that's going to make things harder. Also keep in mind that if they have track hidden up, it's hard to sap a hunter without the pet seeing you and attacking you, even if you have improved sap and you stay in stealth. So just getting close enough to sap in a lot of cases because of track hidden is going to give the hunter an opportunity to send the pet at you. So that makes sapping really not a great strategy either, unfortunately. Lastly, I want to go over the defensive abilities. Aspect of the Monkey, they're going to be using this in melee fights, just gives them a little bit of dodge. And Deterrence. This increases their dodge and parry chance by 25% each. When they press this, you do not want to attack them from the front. Obviously, you're going to be doing way less damage. All of your abilities are going to have a high chance of missing. But especially, you're just setting yourself up to get counterattacked because it's a very high chance they're going to parry you. So when you see Deterrence, you need to get behind the hunter as fast as possible, or you need to vanish and Cheap Shot. Cheap Shot cannot be dodged or parried, and once the hunter is stunned, they can't dodge or parry. You can follow it up with a Kidney Shot. So when you see Deterrence, you need to vanish Cheap Shot, and hopefully they're not deterrencing right after you did an opener. Otherwise, your Cheap Shot is going to be on diminishing return in most cases, and your Kidney Shot might be on cooldown. So in that case, you probably are going to have to blind the Deterrence so that you don't just directly attack into the dodge and the parry. But as a Dagger Rogue, you have a much easier time fighting through this because you can use Backstab, which will never get dodged or parried. Next, I want to go over the trap in particular. Once you get trapped, it's a lot of trouble. So I wanted to go over what you can do to not get freezing trapped. So number one, you can choose to eat the trap. This means that you are voluntarily going to get hit by the ice trap, but you're not going to allow it to freeze you, essentially, right? So if you use Skull of Impending Doom, you can get the trap, become frozen, and then in 2 or less seconds whenever the Skull of Impending Doom does damage to you, it will break the ice trap, and you'll even have a speed boost to try and catch up. So Skull of Impending Doom is a great option against the Hunter, and you just got to keep an eye on it. Make sure it doesn't do too much damage to you, or else you could die really fast. The other option is Ice Reflector. Now, this doesn't actually reflect the ice trap back to the Hunter and freeze them, but it does prevent you from getting frozen. So if you do press this as the Hunter is scatter feign deathing, you are going to buy enough time to avoid getting trapped, and the 5 seconds is going to last longer than the 4 seconds of scatter shot, so you should be able to get back out of the scatter shot, get in combat, start attacking the Hunter before the ice trap ends up freezing you. Next, you can plan to try and block the trap. Now, the way you're going to do this is summon pets and hope that they run into the ice trap and prevent you from getting frozen. These are also, even if these items do not end up eating the trap, they still are a nuisance to the Hunter, and they can attack and prevent them from going into Cheetah form because they're getting hit by pets, and prevent the Hunter from casting an aim shot because these pets will push back their aim shot cast. So it's still good to use pets even if they don't end up eating the trap, but that's another way to avoid getting trapped. Lastly, you can go for a spell batch play. Now, this is purely predictive. However, a lot of Hunters will be mashing Scattershot. So it's not as hard as it seems against most players to spell batch the Scattershot, but against really good players, they're going to try and play around this. What I mean by this is if I am expecting the Hunter to be pressing Scattershot as soon as my stun ends, I can intentionally give them an opportunity to cast a spell and then gouge. So for example, drop my cheap shot, let my cheap shot end for 1 second, and then kidney shot, or a little less than a second. That way, if they end up scatter shotting me, the kidney shot will last longer than the scatter shot, and I'll be able to essentially put scatter shot on cooldown without getting trapped, which is really good. Gouge is probably the best option. I go for gouges on Hunters constantly to try and hit the scatter shot because it's really low risk. Nothing really can go bad. The only thing that can really go poorly is if they dodged the gouge and then the scatter shot hits you. That's the only thing that could go wrong. But if you do gouge right after a stun lock, they're going to either scatter shot you and you're going to be in a great position. Their scatter shot's on cooldown and the gouge lasts longer than the scatter shot, or you just gouged and it's not that bad. You gained a combo point, you gained some energy, and it was just okay trade-off. You can also vanish. If you vanish at the exact second they scatter shot you, you can avoid the scatter shot. This is the hardest one to pull off because, well, it's the most risky. If it doesn't work out, especially if you're sitting in a flare, you just vanish for nothing. And but if you do time it right, it can be really, really good. You can also blind the scatter. This is most helpful if you think they're going to scatter shot you, but you're not close enough to do any of the other options. So you can blind if you're just running up to a Hunter and you're really expecting them to scatter, and you can time it just right. So that's how you answer the scatter. Lastly, I just want to go over counters for each of their abilities, what you can do to try and combat some of the things they're going to do. If you do get slowed by Concussive Shot, you can try and sprint or vanish to remove the slow. Likewise, if you get snared by wing clip or counterattack, you can spider belt, vanish, or sprint to remove these effects. Keep in mind that spider belt isn't always going to be the best if you don't know what their talents are, because this improved wing clip and counterattack are both talents that not every Hunter is going to have. Most PvP spec Hunters will, but spider belt can be helpful there. For deterrence, like I mentioned, you can either go for backstab, cheap shot, or blind to counter it, and that's pretty much it for the counters to the Hunter's abilities. Next, I'm going to go through a series of fights I had with the Hunter in the Blasted Lands, and wasn't a perfect scenario. I didn't have any crippling poison on me at the time, and I was raid spec, but I still was able to use a lot of different techniques to try and throw the Hunter off. So you can see here, I'm actually going to delay my kidney shot until after my cheap shot ends and catch the scatter. So you can see here that I actually do get hit by a scatter shot, but because my kidney happens after the cheap shot, my kidney is only going off now, the scatter shot doesn't end up hitting me. Now, there's some pros and cons to this play. This is a little risky. By going for the kidney shot, if the hunter would have dodged this, I would have been in trouble. This would have been a riskier play against a orc as well, because they could have had a chance to resist it. However, if it isn't dodged, I'm in a great shape, because now in this case, he didn't even cancel his pet, but regardless, I wouldn't have been able to get trapped there because he was in the stun, and I'm able to damage him. Now, at this point, he has no scatter shot. There's not a lot he can do except just go for an outright feign death trap. So I'm going to be ready for that. And you can see he just goes for a direct feign death trap. Now, if you ever see a hunter feign death trap, you can react. When they scatter shot you, there's nothing you can do. Once you're scattered, the trap is going to hit you. But there's a lot of things you can do if you see that the trap is coming. So I see him feign death, so I vanish the trap, and I don't get affected by it. I also could have tried to run away, potentially and blind him, and as a third option, but that one's a little hard. If you don't get away fast enough, you'll still get hit by the trap. And then as a third option, I could have done anything to cause myself damage. So I didn't expect this hunter. This is the first time I had seen him. So I didn't have a Reflector or a Skull and Penny Doom ready. But if I had either of those, I could have had plenty of time to react and press those as well. So you can see here, out of the vanish, I just cheap shot and we're able to finish him off. Now here, the respawn point is really close. So he's going to show up here in a second, and I'm not going to have an opener. So I'm just going to kind of rapid fire go through a lot of different fights we had. I'm going to lose some, I'm going to win some, and go over, I guess, the game plan, the strategy, and what I'm aiming for, what I could have done better, everything. So you can see here, Hunter shows up as expected. He does get a trap off, and from this point on, you can see he was actually a little slow with the trap. So if I did have anything to prevent that, I could have pressed it. But you can see this is why you don't want to get trapped. The hunter doesn't even have his pet ready. He started at half-life. He doesn't even have full mana. And look how much damage I take. I was at nearly full life. In one trap, he's able to create distance, apply Cheetah form, and you can see that I take an insane amount of damage. He didn't even crit with his multi-shot, and I took almost 3,000 damage. So I use you can see I wait for the Concussive Shot, and then I improve Sprint. That's really my only way I could have killed him here. He made a mistake and Concussive Shotted me early. If he hadn't have done this, I would have no way to win. But I do Sprint immediately and remove the Concussive Shot because I'm playing improved Sprint as daggers, and then I'm able to just run right up to him. Now, here I'm able to backstab him. Now I evasioned because I was low on health, and a hunter can easily hit you for 700-800 with a crit, with a staff or with a two-hander. So I did want to evasion to make sure I didn't take too much damage, and also this prevents getting counterattacked or it does not, sorry, it prevents getting wing clipped. You can't prevent the counterattack. So that would be the reason for that. And you can see we're able to get him. Now here I had just killed the hunter, and he was able to immediately respawn and flare me before I even was able to really drop combat. So in this case, I don't get an opener, but we're both kind of low at the start. And you can see grenades can be really helpful to catch up to the hunter and make sure that you're able to get some damage in. And you can see here that I actually use a Frost Reflector at the same time as the scatter. Now this is actually a perfect Frost Reflector because the hunter had no reaction time. You can get used to timing this. There's some pros and cons to this, but you can see that as he is casting the scatter, I am pressing the Ice Reflector. And this is cutting it close, but it's technically the best thing to do because the hunter has no reaction time. He doesn't see me with a reflector. He doesn't see an animation. He presses scatter, I press reflector, and there's nothing he can do. He can't get the trap off. However, it is a little riskier. I could have reflected a little bit sooner and have been a little safer, but then he would have had more time to react as well. So you can see here, I Frost Reflector right as he does it. He still goes for the scatter trap. You can see this is what happens. It just says reflect, and then you're good to go. Now from here, you can see what happens if there's an improved concussive shot. So even though I was in a great position there, because my grenade's on cooldown, because my sprint's on cooldown, you can still die. So even if you do make a good play against a hunter, you can still be in trouble. Just know that if I had crippling poison, this likely would have been fine. But again, that's why crippling poison is so important, is because you don't want them to just waltz away. If they do create distance, you can see how much damage they can do in a short amount of time. Now here, you're going to see me going for the gouge to try and spell batch the scatter. And I'm actually able to time it here. Right after the kidney, I press gouge. We get the spell batch. But you can see you can still run into some trouble here. So this is what I talked about earlier. So I didn't have any way to prevent myself getting trapped. I had nothing off cooldown. However, I tried to just jump away. Now, even though it seems like I'm kind of a little bit ways away, it's a really deceiving hitbox, and you can get frozen from pretty far away. So in this case, I was trying to sidestep and blind. If I was a little faster with my retarget of him in my blind, I would have had a little more, I would have been able to potentially blind at the same time as the trap and guarantee the win. If I would have just targeted him faster, I could have just killed him. So there's a lot of different macros you can use to try and target your most recent target. But, those also have downsides and can cause issues if you regularly use them. So if you are going to use like macros just for hunter to target recent target, something like that, I wouldn't use them for general purpose, and I don't actually use them at all. And you can see in this case, I probably would have won this fight if I did. And another example here, even if you have pretty high HP, if a hunter traps you, you're going to die in most cases. So you can see, even though things were looking pretty good, I tried to get a grenade. The improved concussive shot sealed my fate. Now, if I had sprint and I didn't get improved concussive shot, I probably could have killed him with a sprint, but at this point it was too late. So that is why it's really important not to get trapped. You need to have a game plan to not get trapped, and otherwise, you can just die at the blink of an eye. So here you can see I res on top of him and try and go for a gouge again. So same thing as I did in the last fight. But this time you can see that he actually dodged it. And this is a successful sidestep. So this is what I tried to do in that previous clip. You can see it is a good strategy. You just need to be faster. And so you can expect them to go for a feign death if they ever fail the scatter setup. So as long as you're fast enough, you can pull off a blind like this. Now, if the pet is on you, you've got a couple options. I probably should have, I probably would have gouged if it was off cooldown, but you can see at the bottom here, my gouge is actually on cooldown. So normally if you blind a hunter, you want to gouge the pet, run up to the hunter, and you can actually re-stealth and cheap shot the hunter as long as they're not on a flare. And in this case, that wasn't an option, so I just go for a vanish, get another cheap shot. This one's going to be on DR, and I just try and burn him down from there. And another strategy is if you're playing rogue, it's really important to not let the hunter get away from you. This is also helpful against shaman. I like to alternate between gouging and backstabbing in a lot of cases. If I'm not, instead of getting frustrated, oh, my gouge isn't going off, oh, my backstab isn't going off, you can alternate between the abilities to make sure at least one of them hits, because one of them has to hit. They're either in front of you or behind you. There's no in between. So you can see there that I would have just kept backstabbing him here. However, my backstab, I was in front of the target. So I ended up just going with the gouge to finish him off. So that is another example of just the sidestep, jumping away from the trap. So here I'm going to be trying to use Skull of Impending Doom to break any of the CC. So you can see I'm going to do a regular stun lock, and then at the end of the kidney shot, I'm going to go ahead and press Skull and Penny Doom. He scatters right into it. It breaks. I'm able to even hit him a couple times before the ice trap, and then chase him down and kill him. Now, if I had Crippling Poison, I wouldn't have had to sprint. And the only thing with the Skull and Penny Doom is I recommend having a macro to swap your weapons back in. And I actually end up hovering it here in just a moment. and I can link that in the description below. It's just equip slot 16 and then put your main hand, equip slot 17, your offhand. This is what I use to unequip the skull. It will stop as long as you just change your weapons. So instead of having a macro to like cancel the aura and then equip your weapons, you can just do one macro, just equip your new weapons. The Skull and Penny Doom will end as soon as it's replaced in your hand. Now in this fight, you saw at the start of the video, I get trapped. And this is actually a case where if you're mounted up, it's honestly not a terrible start as long as you don't get one shot in the opener. You can see he didn't crit here, so I was able to not take too much damage. As long as you're mounted up, you kind of can eat a trap. So if a hunter is trying to cheese you and just sit on a trap, you can just mount up and try and run straight through it if you want to try that approach. And the only other thing that really happens in this duel is I'm just trying to buy for time. I know I'm going to die if I don't vanish. If he would have flared a little faster, I would have died too. If I was PvP spec, I would have been able to cheap shot faster. I would have had, 40 energy would have been enough. But if it gets close, obviously vanish can be used to secure kills, clutch things out, as long as you're not in a flare. And good hunters will always have a flare down. And that's one thing that this hunter never really did in any of the fights. That gave me a lot more flexibility. But really good hunters will always be sitting in a flare and deny you the opportunity to do things like that. Now, to beat a hunter, it's really important to understand their style. So you can see in all of the fights against this hunter, he is really trigger happy with Scattershot. Now, some hunters will be this way, some will be more patient, but I would say most hunters, probably like 90-95% that I fight, just spam Scattershot whenever they're available to. So here, it's actually not that risky for me to just go ahead and blind him the second I get in Scattershot range, because based on the fights that we've had up till now, he's been very aggressive with scattershotting basically. And I actually make a mistake here, especially normally this wouldn't be that bad. If I had crippling poison up, it would be fine here to just fight him straight up, but I should have evasioned, right? If I just let myself get wing clipped basically and allowed the hunter to create distance, and then I just was able to improve sprint through it, but it would have been much better if I didn't have to do that. You can see here, I tried to target the hunter as fast as possible. I kind of hit the pet, but a little slow on my swap there. That's one thing I could improve on, is just retargeting the hunter better. But you can see you've plenty of time to ice Reflector if you avoid the scatter. So his scatter's on cooldown, he's kind of in desperation mode. You can expect the Feign Death ice trap, and then boom, I ice Reflector, and just I'm happy eating the trap, and then he's dead. Now, I have mentioned earlier that if you're able to bait out the scatter shot, the hunter is very vulnerable for the next 30 seconds. Likewise, if you're able to bait out an ice trap, or they throw it around a little, I guess you'd say recklessly, you can actually have a 15-second window to try and get a lot of damage in on the hunter, and they're not going to be able to get as much out of their scatter. So you can see here he made a mistake of still trying to feign death even though he didn't have his trap up, but I put him in a position where he had to scatter to live, and regardless of the mistake of going for the feign death, forcing his hand to use scatter before the trap comes back off cooldown is going to be something you can really use to leverage a good position. Force them to scatter. Now they don't have a scatter up. Now what a lot of hunters will do is try and kite you through the trap. That's where if you have a pet or a reflector, you can just run straight through, and that's the counter there. But in this case, forcing the scatter when he couldn't follow up with the trap basically guaranteed a win once I was able to catch up to him. So here in this case, the hunter had seen me, had a hunter's mark on me. So like I suggested, I tried to mount up so that I have increased movement speed. Now I didn't see this trap until it was too late, so I did end up just running straight into a trap. But like I said, if you are on your mount and you get trapped, you're in a little better of a position. And here I did have my Skull Impending Doom. So you see I go for a gouge to try and maybe get his scatter shot, and he held it this time. Now he did mess up his scatter shot, and that gave me time to get my Skull Impending Doom down. But I do think I unequipped my skull a little fast here. I think the movement speed would have helped. But here I can show you the blind trick. Basically, if you blind the hunter, gouge the pet, try and get some distance from the pet, and mash cheap shot. Now here I'm actually pressing a macro that enters stealth and then presses cheap shot. But you can see you're actually able to blind, gouge the pet, and then get a stealth opener. And I was able to finish him off. Now at the end here, I did want to show footage from like duel tournaments when you have really, really good hunters that are really experienced in the rogue matchup. And so this is Bean. You can see just how broken track hidden is. Look how far away he can see the rogue. And this is a rogue without Master of Deception. The rogue is playing daggers. And it's just crazy how far you can see him. Now, you can see Bean, the first button he presses is Flare. The reason for this is the rogue is probably trying to use reflectors, trying to use skull at the end of the stun, trying to do something to stop the trap. And what Bean is doing is he's just going to be patient. Get a flare down. Deny the ability to use Vanish now for the rest of the 30 seconds that he's sitting in the flare. Just let the rogue essentially kill themselves using the Skull Impending Doom. So you can see the Skull Impending Doom looks like a chicken icon. It's just going there. So the rogue is taking damage, and he just applies counterattack. And just now, essentially, the rogue is in a position where he can't vanish to counter Deterrence, which we went over as one of the 2 counters. The only other thing the rogue can do is blind. The problem is he's just used Skull and Evasion. So now if he blinds, he can't get any stealth opener back onto Bean because he's sitting in the middle of a flare, and he really would just be blinding off the counterattack and then losing his cooldowns. So you can see immediately you're in a terrible position. A really good hunter is going to make things impossible on you. Now you can see he gets a counterattack, forcing the improved sprint, and is able to just chill in the flare. Now, here he goes for a grenade. If this grenade hits, it's over. And so you can see it looks like the grenade hit. I can't really... Yep, looks like the grenade hit. He waited until the grenade hit, and then he went for the scatter. And at this point, the duel's over. Now, he was patient. He didn't give the rogue a chance to break the scatter. You can see how much damage the rogue took just by pet and just, occasional hits from Bean going through the evasion, and then also the Skull of Impending Doom doing a ton of damage. It also looks like here Bean has a Skull of Impending Doom himself in, so if he feels like he was in a position where he thinks the rogue is about to blind him, he can Skull. And you can see he sets up a Serpent Sting. He doesn't even go for an aim shot here in case the ice trap were to break. He has a flare on Rockman 2 as it starts. You can see he goes for a multi-shot, and at this point, there's nothing he can do. He has the flare debuff. You can see how far the rogue is moved out of the flare, and he still has the debuff. And he's saving his Concussive Shot for any potential improved sprint. He's got Cheetah on, and you can see it almost feels helpless to fight a hunter if they're playing really well. And this is why at the beginning of the video, I did mention that it's the hardest matchup, and if you're playing a really good player, there's really nothing you can do. A perfectly played hunter you can't beat. It's a counter. And just be aware that there's gimmicks and things. And it's not necessarily that Rockman made mistakes in that duel. It's just he tried to predict and counter a scatter that Bean didn't even throw out. So you can see this is another game. Bean's going to go for the same strategy of trying to flare as soon as possible. And look, you see another Reflector. So Rockman, he's trying to catch a scatter. He's trying to ice Reflector at the end of every stun, but you can see Bean hasn't even needed to use Trinket yet, and he can just comfortably and you can see actually in this case, Rockman tries to blind and his Bear-Offs break it, but it happens. Now Rockman tries to run away. Not the best strategy. Now that the Reflector is gone, there's nothing he can do here. So the Reflector ended. We know Skull of Many Dooms on cooldown. The pets are gone at this point. The trap goes off, and you can see Bean here actually goes for some food and does the same thing. So he doesn't even go for an aim shot. He plays it safe, heals up, starts kiting. You can see he actually canceled his Cheetah form because he was anticipating potentially getting hit by a grenade. So you can see the grenade is getting thrown. He cancels his Cheetah. He keeps trying with the grenade. He does eventually get hit by the grenade. But I do want to, again, bring up the fact that the longer he stalls like this, the worse things get. Scatter has 10 seconds left. So it doesn't matter. He just puts a flare down. It doesn't matter what happens here because the second that he comes out of this blind, he can scatter trap again. So he looks like he's going to go for a wing clip, try and create some distance since the crippling poison didn't proc, and save his scatter. But it's just, at this point, it's over. Even if the poison connected, he could have just scatter shotted as soon as a gouge went out. And you can see the point of this is to show if the hunter is good, you can't win. I think then he trolls here and goes for an immolation trap kill. But this is just a highlight. This is a very hunter-centric matchup. Everything that I went over is to give you an edge. 99% of hunters it's going to work against. But those 1% of players that are really, really knowledgeable in the matchup know what to do, know to get a flare down, know to use grenade to set up for the scatter. It's just near impossible to win. They can just be patient. If they have good gear, they're going to be tanky enough that they can just wait for your reflectors to end. And unless you get lucky timing and just happen to press it the second that they scatter, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any other things that you do against hunters. If you have any questions on the matchup, let me know. And thanks for watching.